Greetings and welcome to the first lecture on Thomas Hobbes, who is generally regarded as the originator of social contract theory. And I'll talk a little bit about social contract theory in just a little bit. There is a connection between Machiavelli and Hobbes, and that is that Hobbes wants to empirically test Machiavelli's assertion, his claim, that power is the most important variable in politics. And Hobbes agrees with him, believes that a coherent community can be created by human intelligence, and most importantly, believing in this notion that power and not justice, as the ancient Greeks had claimed, was the most important variable in understanding political activity. I didn't put it in your notes, but the Leviathan, which is Hobbes's best known work and the one that your chapter focuses in on, was written during the English Civil War, a deadly period, probably the worst period in British history, which demonstrated the necessity of strong central authority to avoid discord in civil war. He also lived during the worst conflict until World War I in the history of the world. During the prime of his life, from 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War ravaged Europe. This was the last of the major religious wars in Europe, fought between Catholic and Protestant princes over which was practicing the true faith. The war actually ended because the population of Europe declined basically by about a third during this era. And the resulting peace was one in which, well, whatever the religion of the prince or king or emperor or whatever title the leader was using, he or she would determine the religion of that particular state. So it became known as whoever reigns rules and makes those kinds of decisions. Now, Hobbes is not a Democrat. Hobbes believes that people cannot be trusted to govern. And so Hobbes becomes a very strong advocate for a strong monarch. And yet he's important for us because even though he rejects democracy, many of his assumptions about government we would hold true today in America, right? The idea that governmental power does not come from God. It's not mystical. Government is not a living entity in an organic state, as the ancient Greeks would have you believe. But government is artificial. It's a tool people created to perform tasks. So government is created by the people and not by God. And of course, all tools have a purpose. We create them to perform certain tasks. And so in this case, the reason why we create government is to provide order and security and a rule of law. And so the good government is the government that can protect the people in its society, and a bad one is one that cannot. So Hobbes makes the claim, going back to your notes now, that people are self-interested. Remember that Machiavelli had said the same thing, that people were self-interested. Hobbes agrees. He's kind of a utilitarian, and you really don't need to know that, but think about the root word utility, right? People pursue pleasure and avoid pain. And the reason that people obey their rulers is because they rationally calculate that it is in their self-interest. Once again, it's not because of any kind of divine inspiration or divine spark or anything like that. So like Machiavelli, we start with a human nature that is similar. The idea that humans are selfish, that they will do a lot, maybe some would say even anything, to better their positions. And Hobbes claims that without government, people left to themselves would act on their evil impulses. I can't believe I got a phone call right in the middle of a mini lecture. That has never happened before I thought I had the darn thing off. And it was an important call, so I'm glad that I got it. So just to recap the first 5 minutes, Hobbes claims that power is the most important variable in politics, that people are egoistic, they're self-centered, like Machiavelli had claimed, that in this particular case, they're selfish, they're egoistic. And Hobbes claims that nations are like this too. I didn't write this down in the notes, but nations, like people, are self-interested, and nations compete like individuals do in a battle for power and wealth, etc. Now, where Hobbes begins to move away from Machiavelli is this notion of the social contract. It's number 3 in your notes, that Hobbes believes that people create government through the social contract to provide order and security. And if you think about a contract, perhaps you bought a new car, right? In a contract, both parties have obligations. So the last time I bought a new car, my obligation was to make 48 car payments. And Ford, and I bought a Ford, their obligation was to warranty the car for 75,000 miles. So if the car had a defect, they would have to pay for the repair. And obviously, there are consequences for breaking the contract. If I don't make the car payment, maybe Ford repossesses the car. If the car breaks down and Ford refuses to repair it, I have recourse. I can take them to court and get my costs reimbursed because they were under an obligation to pay for it. And so Hobbes makes this claim about government. The governors have an obligation, the governed have an obligation, right? As an individual, if I break the law, for example, if I'm speeding on Highway 99 and I get caught, there's a penalty for violating the law. I might have to pay, I don't know, I haven't had a speeding ticket in forever, but maybe $300. I don't know, that sounds a little high to me, but maybe not. And in this particular case, if the purpose of the government is to provide order and they can't do that, then we, the people, have recourse, and we have the right to create a new government that will do its job. And it's important because John Locke is going to modify this idea of the social contract by saying that the primary purpose of the government is to protect our natural liberties or natural rights. And the American Revolution is, in essence, the first social contract theory revolution really in the history of the world. And I'll talk about that more when I talk about Locke later. So Hobbes believes that people create government through mutual consent, through their rationality, through the social contract, to provide both order and security. It is through government that people can avoid chaos and a perpetual state of war. So I talked about political values earlier: order, freedom, equality. For Hobbes, there is no question that security is the greatest good and insecurity is the greatest evil. And your book doesn't point this out, but if you read Hobbes, Hobbes believes that people are consumed by an overwhelming fear of death. He probably overstates this a bit, in my opinion. I don't think I've ever woken up and said, oh my God, everything I've wanted to do, I better do it today because this is the last day I've got. I think we've all figured out that someday we're going to die, but I don't think that it is all consuming. Maybe it was for Hobbes. Maybe he is reflecting his own fear in this particular case. And certainly, I think as you get older, it becomes a greater concern. But I don't think it's a day-to-day concern, and I think there are things that daily consume us much more than this fear. As I mentioned earlier, democracy for Hobbes is a doomed political system. And the primary reason is people only want to pursue their own selfish interest. And so the public interest isn't served. And certainly, if you look at the battles in Washington, D.C. today, Hobbes would say, see, I told you so, right? You've got these two major political parties in America that I call Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. And you could have an interesting debate about which party's dumb and which party's dumber. But the point is that not a whole lot has gotten done for several years. And in my opinion, both political parties are at fault here. And of course, because people are unable and cannot be trusted to govern, you need that strong monarch to compel order and to compel authority. So to summarize, and it's summarized under 3A in your notes, the social contract, which is how people create government according to Hobbes. The social contract is created by very fearful, self-interested, but rational individuals who establish political authority. So the key here for me is that people have granted this authority to government, that governmental power and sovereignty is vested in government by the people. So the people are trusting, in this case, the king to govern them, but ultimately, that authority came from the people. And ultimately, the governor or king or queen or emperor, whatever title we want to give, Hobbes uses the term monarch throughout the Leviathan. But the monarch's duty is to serve the people by protecting them. And of course, again, remember in the contract, at the key to a contract is you have two parties with mutual obligations. And in this particular case, the obligation of the king is to provide order and security for the people. I talk a bit more about the social contract down below, and we'll talk more about it in the next mini lecture. But the point is that Hobbes has a tough task. And the task is, why are people going to be willing to give up freedom and give up equality for order? And of course, Hobbes's argument is that without government, anarchy, which originally meant without a monarch, today anarchy, right, is when government authority fails altogether, but would be a wretched place. And I'll start the next mini lecture with Hobbes's view of human nature. But essentially, strong government is needed to enforce rules. And because the state of nature would be this perpetual state of war, this awful state, people gladly and willingly trade freedom and equality for the security and the order of an organized society. And in the next mini lecture, we'll talk about this view of human nature, that human judgment is unreliable due to egoism and self-interest, and that without a sovereign, the political system would be a perpetual and permanent state of nature and war and anarchy. So I hope you enjoyed the first lecture. I know it was a little disjointed because of that phone call. Turn that darn phone off and I'll get ready to make a second mini lecture. And I will be starting with Hobbes's view of human nature in the next mini lecture. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Talk to you soon.